A thin mist clung to the streets outside St. Mary's Hospital, the pavement slick with the remnants of a late-night drizzle. Inside, the glow of fluorescent lights buzzed over exhausted nurses and overworked doctors, their movements quick, efficient, mechanical. It was just another night of emergencies, of hurried gurneys and hushed prayers, until the whimpering began. At first, no one paid much attention. A stray dog crying outside wasn't unusual, especially near a hospital where the scent of discarded food scraps might lure in a hungry animal. But as the minutes passed, the sound grew more persistent, a high, keening whimper that cut through the muffled chaos inside. Olivia Monroe, a nurse with 8 years of night shifts under her belt, exhaled sharply as she rubbed her temples. It had been a long shift, the kind that turned hours into a blur of antiseptic and heartbreak. A car accident victim had just been wheeled into surgery, his vitals unstable, his fate uncertain. She hadn't even had time to grab her usual cup of machine-brewed coffee when the sound reached her again. That cry. Sharp. Desperate. Almost pleading. She turned toward the entrance, her tired feet dragging her forward before she fully understood why. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in a gust of cold, damp air. And there it was. A small puppy, barely more than skin and bones, sat just beyond the entrance. Its fur was a patchwork of mud and tangled tufts, its ribs pressing against its fragile frame. But it wasn't the appearance that sent a shiver through Olivia's spine, it was the way the puppy stared up at her. Its dark, wet eyes were locked onto hers, unwavering. She stepped forward, slowly. "Hey there, little guy." The puppy took a step back but didn't run. Instead, it let out another whimper, its tiny body trembling. Olivia crouched, her fingers instinctively reaching toward it. "Are you lost?" she murmured, her voice softer now. The puppy let out a sharp yelp and turned toward the hospital doors, stepping closer, then looking back at her. A strange prickling sensation crawled up Olivia's spine. It wasn't begging for food. It wasn't trying to escape the cold. It was trying to lead her somewhere. A rustle of movement behind her made Olivia glance over her shoulder. Dr. Raj Patel, a senior physician known for his sharp mind and even sharper skepticism, stood with a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Something wrong?" he asked, his brow lifting slightly. Olivia gestured toward the puppy, who was still watching them with unsettling intensity. "This little guy won't stop crying. I think he's trying to tell us something." Dr. Patel exhaled, glancing at the pup with a mixture of amusement and fatigue. "Or he's just a stray who learned how to beg dramatically." Olivia frowned. "No, it's different. Look at him." The doctor sighed but took a step closer. The moment he did, the puppy barked, a sharp, insistent sound. Then, without hesitation, it turned and bolted toward the parking lot. Olivia jolted. "Did you see that?" Dr. Patel hesitated for only a second before his professional instincts took over. "All right. Let's see where Lassie here is trying to take us." The night was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. The puppy zigzagged between parked cars, pausing every few steps to make sure they were following. Then it stopped. Olivia felt her breath hitch as she caught sight of what the puppy had led them to. A dark-colored sedan, barely visible in the dim lighting, sat at the farthest edge of the parking lot. Something about it felt wrong. The windshield was cracked, the hood dented, and the driver's side door was slightly ajar. A sick feeling settled in Olivia's stomach as she exchanged a glance with Dr. Patel. Without a word, they stepped closer. Dr. Patel reached for his penlight and flicked it on, the beam slicing through the shadows. Inside the car, slumped motionless against the steering wheel, was a man. A man who wasn't moving. "Call a code," Dr. Patel ordered, his voice suddenly sharp with urgency. Olivia was already grabbing her radio. "We need a stretcher in the parking lot. Possible unconscious male, unresponsive." The puppy let out a desperate whine, clawing at the car's door. Olivia's pulse pounded as she yanked the door open. The scent of blood and damp fabric hit her at once. The man's face was partially obscured by dark, matted hair, but she could see the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was still alive. Dr. Patel checked his pulse, his fingers pressing against the man's neck. Weak, but present. He's hypothermic. We need to move him now. The wail of an approaching stretcher team cut through the silence. Olivia reached out and gently shook the man's shoulder. Sir? Can you hear me? No response. Then, as the team began lifting him from the car, Olivia's gaze fell on something peeking from his jacket pocket. A flash of laminated plastic, slightly bent at the edges. Her breath caught. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she turned it toward the light. A hospital ID badge. And beneath the smudged lettering, a name she recognized. Daniel Hayes. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't just some stranger. He was a paramedic from their own hospital, and he had been missing for hours. The puppy whimpered again, nudging at Daniel's limp hand as if willing him to wake up. Olivia could barely process what she was seeing, but one thing was crystal clear. This little dog hadn't just been crying for help. It had been trying to save his life. The emergency room doors burst open as the paramedics rushed Daniel inside, the wheels of the stretcher rattling against the linoleum floor. Olivia kept pace beside them, her heart hammering. The man lying unconscious before her wasn't just another patient. He was one of their own. Dr. Patel walked briskly ahead, already barking orders. Get him into Trauma Bay 3. Start a central line, warm fluids. He's hypothermic and hypotensive, we need a full workup. The team moved with practiced urgency. Nurses snapped into action, placing leads on Daniel's chest, adjusting oxygen levels, pushing heated fluids through his veins. Olivia hovered near the foot of the bed, watching his face, pale and unmoving beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Scout, the tiny, mud-streaked hero who had led them to him, stood by the entrance, his paws trembling on the slippery floor. Every few seconds, he let out a low, distressed whine. Olivia had never seen an animal act this way, so intent, so desperate. She knelt and scooped him up, whispering, "He's in good hands now, little guy." The puppy shivered against her chest, his tiny heart racing. Olivia didn't know whether it was fear or relief. Across the room, Dr. Patel examined Daniel's scans, his expression unreadable. Olivia stepped closer, Scout still cradled in her arms. "How bad is it?" she asked. Dr. Patel exhaled through his nose, tapping a pen against the monitor. No external trauma beyond minor lacerations. But internally, he gestured to the X-ray. Rib fractures, a collapsed lung. Possible internal bleeding. He was out there for hours in the cold. If the dog hadn't led us to him. He let the sentence trail off. The alternative was clear. Olivia's stomach tightened. What the hell happened to him? Dr. Patel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the bundle of personal effects the paramedics had collected. A cracked phone. A wallet. His hospital ID badge. And something else. A note, folded and slightly crumpled. Dr. Patel smoothed it open and read it aloud. "If anything happens, Scout knows." A chill skated down Olivia's spine. She looked at the puppy in her arms, his deep brown eyes staring intently at Daniel. Scout knew. But knew what? She turned to Dr. Patel, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't think someone did this to him on purpose, do you?" Dr. Patel's jaw tightened. "I don't like coincidences, Monroe. And this? This doesn't feel like an accident." A sharp knock on the trauma room door interrupted them. Detective Marcus Reed stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene with practiced scrutiny. A seasoned investigator, Reed had the kind of presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing it. "Got a call from the responding paramedics," he said. "Wanted to see this for myself." Olivia stepped aside as he approached Daniel's bed, taking in the man's injuries, the note, and finally, Scout, who growled softly at his presence. "Not a fan of cops, huh?" Reed murmured, crouching slightly to meet the puppy's eyes. He gave Olivia a sideways glance. "Where'd he come from?" Olivia sighed. He was outside the ER, crying nonstop. Led us straight to Daniel. Reed's brows lifted slightly. Smart dog. His gaze flicked to Dr. Patel. What's the prognosis? Dr. Patel's expression remained guarded. It's too soon to tell. But if you're here, that means you think there's something more to this. Reed straightened, his hand resting on his belt. I reviewed the traffic cam footage near the hospital. Daniel's car didn't just crash, it was forced off the road. The room fell into a heavy silence. Olivia's grip tightened around Scout. Someone tried to kill him. It wasn't a question. Reed nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. The footage is grainy, but there was another car. It followed him for several blocks before the crash. No signs of braking. Whoever was driving meant to run him off the road. Dr. Patel crossed his arms, his expression dark. Then why leave him alive? Reed exhaled. That's the part that doesn't make sense. If it was a hit, why not finish the job? Instead, they left him bleeding out in the cold. Olivia glanced at Daniel, unconscious, unaware of the storm brewing around him. Maybe they thought he wouldn't make it. Or maybe, Reed said, they were looking for something and didn't find it. A chill passed over Olivia. What if Daniel had something they wanted? What if they searched him after the crash but left before they could be caught? She looked at Scout again, his tiny body curled against her chest. Then why didn't they take the dog? Reed frowned. Good question. His eyes darkened. Maybe because Scout saw who did it. The idea sent a fresh wave of unease through Olivia. Had the little dog witnessed the attack? Had he recognized the assailant? A nurse hurried into the trauma room, her face pale. Dr. Patel, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet with the hospital's internal security footage pulled up. The timestamp showed earlier that evening, right before Daniel was supposed to start his shift. The screen flickered, and there he was, Daniel, stepping out of his car in the employee parking lot. He seemed tense, glancing over his shoulder. Then another figure emerged from the shadows, a man. His face was blurred in the footage, but his posture was aggressive, his hands gripping Daniel's shoulders in a way that wasn't friendly. Daniel tried to pull away. The man shoved him back against the car. A few heated words were exchanged before. The screen went black. Damn it, Reed muttered. That's where the camera cuts out? The nurse nodded. The rest of the footage is corrupted. But that's the last time we see Daniel before the accident. Olivia swallowed hard. Someone had confronted him in the parking lot. Someone who had likely followed him as he drove. Dr. Patel ran a hand over his face. Whoever this is, they aren't done. Olivia looked down at Scout, stroking his damp fur. And Daniel's the only one who knows the truth. Reed's voice was low. Then we better hope he wakes up soon. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the dimly lit hospital room. Daniel lay motionless in the bed, his face pale against the stark white sheets. An oxygen tube rested beneath his nose, 4 lines snaking from his arms. Olivia stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders. Scout, the tiny stray who had saved Daniel's life, sat on the floor beside her, his dark eyes fixed on the unconscious man. Every so often, the puppy whimpered, ears twitching at the faintest sound. Dr. Patel entered the room, scanning Daniel's vitals on the monitor. He's stable, he murmured. But there's no telling when he'll wake up. Olivia sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. And until then, we have nothing. No answers. No suspects. Detective Reed leaned against the doorframe, his gaze sharp. We have a suspect, he corrected. We just don't have a name or a face. He lifted his phone, showing a still image from the corrupted security footage. The blurred figure stood ominously close to Daniel. Even through the distortion, their posture radiated menace. Whoever this is, Reed continued, they didn't just want to scare him. They wanted something from him. Dr. Patel adjusted Daniel's oxygen levels. The question is, did they get it? Olivia frowned, glancing between Daniel and Scout. I keep thinking about the note we found in his pocket. If anything happens, Scout knows. What if that wasn't just a random phrase? What if Daniel left the dog behind on purpose? What if Scout actually knows something? Reed let out a slow breath, considering. Animals have incredible memory and instincts. If he was with Daniel before the attack, maybe he saw the attacker. Maybe he knows where Daniel was before the crash. Olivia knelt beside Scout, stroking his fur. If only we could ask him. At the sound of her voice, Scout's ears perked up. Then, without warning, he scrambled to his feet, barking frantically at the door. Reed tensed. What the hell? Scout lunged toward the hallway, his tiny body vibrating with urgency. Olivia barely had time to react before the puppy took off down the corridor. Scout, wait! She called, chasing after him. Reed and Dr. Patel exchanged a look before following. The puppy darted through the hospital, weaving between nurses and visitors. Olivia's heart pounded as she ran to keep up. Scout wasn't just running aimlessly. He had a destination. He rounded a corner, paws skidding on the smooth floor, then stopped in front of a supply closet. A locked supply closet. Olivia reached him first, breathing hard. Scout pawed at the door, growling low in his throat. Reed caught up seconds later, hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Why is he stopping here? Olivia shook her head. I don't know. But he's acting like. Before she could finish the thought, a thud sounded from inside the closet. A quiet, deliberate sound. Someone was in there. Reed's entire demeanor shifted. He motioned for Olivia to step back, then pressed himself against the wall beside the door. His hand hovered over his holster. Dr. Patel arrived last, panting. What's going on? Reed held up a finger, signaling for silence. Another sound came from inside, this time, a faint rustling. Like someone shifting their weight. Reed exhaled, then knocked once. This is Detective Marcus Reed with the police. Step out of the closet, hands where I can see them. Silence. Then, the doorknob rattled. Reed's hand snapped to his gun, drawing it smoothly. I won't ask again. A long pause. Then, slowly the lock clicked. The door creaked open an inch. A man stepped out, disheveled, sweat dampening his collar, his eyes darting between them in panic. He was young, mid-30s maybe. His hospital scrubs wrinkled and stained. Olivia recognized him instantly. Dr. Ethan Grayson, a fellow physician, someone she had worked alongside for years. What the hell are you doing in there? Olivia demanded, still breathless. Dr. Grayson's hands twitched at his sides. I was just. His gaze flicked to Scout, who was still growling at his feet. Reed stepped forward, his gun still drawn. I'd suggest you tell the truth. Fast. Grayson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I wasn't trying to. He exhaled sharply, squeezing his eyes shut. Then, in a rush. I know what happened to Daniel. Olivia's breath caught. What? Grayson wiped his forehead, looking like he might pass out. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he whispered. But they said if I talked, they'd come for me next. Olivia's skin prickled. Who's they? Grayson's gaze darted toward Reed, his panic deepening. I can't. Reed's patience snapped. Dr. Grayson, I have a critically injured paramedic in a hospital bed and security footage of you confronting him before his car was run off the road. So unless you want to spend the night in a holding cell, start talking. Grayson's body sagged in defeat. He raked a shaking hand through his hair. It's about the pills. A heavy silence settled over them. Dr. Patel stiffened. Pills. Grayson nodded, swallowing hard. Daniel, he found out. About the stolen medications. Olivia's pulse spiked. Are you saying someone's been running drugs out of the hospital? Grayson squeezed his eyes shut. Not just someone. A whole operation. High-value narcotics, painkillers, sedatives, stimulant. It's been going on for months. Maybe longer. Reed's jaw clenched. And Daniel was on to them. Grayson nodded weakly. He told me 2 nights ago. He'd found discrepancies in supply records, meds that should have been accounted for but weren't. He was going to report it. Olivia's stomach churned. And someone tried to stop him. Grayson exhaled shakily. I warned him to drop it. I told him these people weren't just dealers, they were dangerous. Reed's voice was like steel. Who are they? Grayson shook his head, his eyes darting around as if expecting someone to be watching. I don't know all their names, I swear. But I know the guy who confronted Daniel in the parking lot. He licked his lips. Then, voice barely above a whisper, he said. It was someone inside the hospital. Someone with access. Olivia's blood turned to ice. Dr. Patel's expression darkened. Who? Grayson's lips parted, the name on the tip of his tongue. Then the hospital lights flickered. The overhead fluorescence buzzed, dimming for a fraction of a second before returning to full brightness. It was barely noticeable, but Olivia felt the shift in the air. Reed's hand went to his radio. That wasn't an outage, he murmured. That was a power surge. Dr. Patel inhaled sharply. The security system. Olivia's breath caught. Someone was watching them. And whoever it was, they knew they were getting too close. The moment the hospital lights flickered, a cold certainty settled over Olivia. Someone was watching them. Detective Reed's hand was already on his radio, but before he could speak, a sharp static burst cut through the frequency. The hospital's security system was compromised. Grayson paled, his breath coming in shallow gasps. They know, he whispered. They know I told you. Olivia's mind raced. They had pushed too far, uncovered too much. Whoever was behind the stolen medications, whoever had tried to silence Daniel, was inside the hospital right now. Scout let out a sharp, urgent bark. The puppy's tiny frame was stiff, his ears twitching as if he could hear something they couldn't. Reed's face was grim. We need to move. Now. Grayson took a step back, shaking his head. No, if I leave this room, I'm dead. His voice cracked. You don't understand. These people aren't just stealing pills. They're tied to something bigger. Olivia grabbed his arm. Then tell us who. Grayson's lips trembled. It's... A gunshot rang out. The sound ricocheted through the hospital corridor like a thunderclap. Reed reacted instantly, shoving Olivia and Grayson down. Dr. Patel ducked behind a cart. Scout yelped and bolted under a gurney. Reed's gun was out, his body low, eyes scanning for the shooter. But the shot hadn't been aimed at them. It had come from farther down the hall. The hospital plunged into chaos. Shouts erupted as nurses and doctors scrambled for cover. Somewhere, an alarm blared. Reed grabbed his radio. Shots fired. 3rd floor, west wing. I need backup now. Then, another gunshot. Olivia's heart pounded. We have to get to Daniel. Reed didn't hesitate. Move! They ran. Scout darted ahead, his small body slipping through the chaos. The puppy wasn't just running blindly, he was leading them. Olivia pushed forward, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They rounded the last corner to the ICU. And froze. The door to Daniel's room was open. Inside, a dark figure loomed over his bed. Daniel was awake, his eyes fluttering, his body too weak to fight back. His breathing mask was half off, his fingers struggling to grip the sheets. And the figure standing above him held a syringe. Olivia's stomach turned to ice. They were going to kill him. Reed fired first. The gunshot split the air. The bullet struck just inches from the figure's shoulder, forcing them to jerk back. The syringe clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, time froze. Then the figure turned and Olivia's breath caught. Dr. Mark Halstead. A respected senior physician. A man Olivia had worked with for years. Her mind reeled. He was behind it? Halstead's face twisted with rage. You have no idea what you're interfering with, he snarled. Reed stepped forward, gun still raised. Hands where I can see them. Halstead's gaze darted to the window. The hospital was 3 stories up. A fall wouldn't be fatal, but it would give him a chance to escape. Don't, Olivia warned. But he lunged. Reed fired again, this time hitting his leg. Halstead collapsed with a guttural cry, gripping his wounded thigh. The syringe rolled under the bed, forgotten. Scout snarled, his tiny body vibrating with fury. He snapped at Halstead's coat, yanking it with all his strength, as if he understood the man had tried to kill Daniel. Reed kicked the syringe farther away and pinned Halstead down. It's over. The hallway erupted as hospital security and uniformed officers stormed in. Within seconds, Halstead was in handcuffs, his face contorted with pain and fury. Olivia barely heard the chaos around her. She rushed to Daniel's side, grabbing his hand. His eyes were open, hazy but aware. A weak smile tugged at his lips. "Hey, Liv," he rasped. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. "You scared the hell out of me." He tried to chuckle, but it turned into a cough. "Guess I owe Scout a steak dinner." The puppy licked Daniel's fingers, his tail wagging furiously. Olivia exhaled shakily, brushing his hair back. "Rest. You're safe now." Daniel's gaze flickered to Halstead, who was being hauled away. He swallowed. "I knew it was him." Reed stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "We need to know everything, Daniel." Halstead wasn't working alone. Daniel's throat bobbed as he tried to gather his strength. There's a ledger," he murmured. "Records of the shipments, the deals. He kept it hidden in the—" His eyes fluttered. He was slipping back into unconsciousness. "Where, Daniel?" Reed pressed. Daniel's fingers twitched. His lips parted. Then, barely above a whisper, "Scout knows." Olivia's breath hitched. She looked down at the little dog, who stared back at her with those deep, knowing eyes. And suddenly, she understood. The mystery wasn't over. Scout had one last secret to reveal.